we know what kids need. And even if it's only 90% right, getting 90% right in the moment was more important than 100%.
100%.
A year later. So,
by the way, for everyone who's listening, 72% right.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's trying to be 100% right, where 72 gets you into the Hall of Fame of business and communication. Hey everybody, welcome to the GaryVee Audio Experience. In my continuation of finding interesting people to talk to and do original content, I'm excited about this one. I'm extremely excited about it because this was probably the most conversation pre-filming, because I like to keep it very improv, but Steve hit me hard with his Jets fandom, and so that excites me. And then obviously for everybody listening at home, you know the journey I'm on with the VeeFriends intellectual property, and early on I thought I was going more Pokemon and Disney when I would talk to it about my friends, but with the ambition I have of putting positivity into the world with the traits, and just by meeting people along the way that worked with Jim Henson and things of that nature, I didn't realize how much Sesame Street DNA is in VeeFriends, and so it is a stunningly big honor of mine to have Steve on the show. Steve, why don't you tell everybody who you are and what you do, and then we'll rock and roll.
All right, well, thank you for having me. I am Steve Youngwood. I'm the CEO of Sesame Workshop. And for those who don't know, Sesame Workshop, best known for making Sesame Street, but we are a global not-for-profit media education organization with a mission of helping kids grow stronger, smarter, and kinder. And I like to say the things, if you know 3-4 things about the workshop, we focus on early childhood because that's where you think you can have the greatest long-term impact, and for those business-oriented, the greatest return on investment. We focus on the cognitive skills, but really the whole child, because we're really about getting the kid ready for life, and it's much more about numbers and writing. It's about social emotional. It's about positive identity. It's about emotional well-being, and that for 2 reasons we focus on media. Because kids consume a lot of it in technology, and so it's never about if they're learning, it's about what they're learning. So let's harness that for something that can prepare them for life. But also, from the day one when Joan and Lloyd, the founders, started, it was incredibly scalable. And so if you want to reach kids at scale in an engaging way and do it and make a difference, that's who we are.
I love it. What before we go into the macro, because I have a lot of questions about just the great work you've been doing during COVID, the ever-changing landscape of distribution of information. When I think about Sesame, from my standpoint, it's one of I was born in Belarus, and Sesame Street was one of the ways I learned English. And we were poor, so we had no cable, so there wasn't a lot of channels, and Sesame Street was always there. When I think about Sesame in the 70s and 80s, from a consumption and reach standpoint, that was such a big advantage. Obviously now the fragmentation of media and streaming and CTV, and so curious in your perspective on that. I'm pumped that for a lot of people, this might be the first time they've realized there's so much more to the organization than just that content. But before we go into all of that, I always like to talk to the person, when you were a little guy, did you expect to be the CEO of Sesame? Like give me a little let's do 3 or 4 minutes on you, how you grew up, what kind of dude you were, and your career, and then we'll bounce back to the macro.
Yeah, so I grew up in New York. I always say, did I expect to become the CEO of Sesame? No, but in retrospect, I probably should have. I was born in '69 and Sesame was founded in '69. And as Gary and I were talking, it's also the last time the Jets won the Super Bowl.
January 12th, one of the best days in history. I was -6.
So I grew up with the memories of Big Bird sort of walking out on stage and sort of that comfort and warmth. And now in retrospect, the knowledge that I actually got from it. But I was, I was in some ways your normal sort of kid. I love sports. I loved being a kid. I think in my yearbook, I had the thing, it's economically unsound to grow up because I, embraced the kiddom. The journey wasn't straight. I did a lot of things. My most recent, spent a long time in Viacom. Back in the days, building, the biggest brands on a kind of a macro level, like MTV, Nickelodeon, but then on a micro level, like SpongeBob, and Dora, and sort of, et cetera. And that's probably the journey that took me there. I saw the power of media. I saw how it can engage. I saw how brands cut across platforms at very stages of the disruption, the digital transformation that you kind of just got to. And it was that and I got myself interested in more educational, working on some outside companies and being on some boards. And I'm like, wow, if I could harness my expertise in media and how that can engage and move people and sort of target it at a cause and a mission. Because Sesame entertains, but it entertains in order to educate. If I could take that expertise, bring it to sort of a smaller organization where I could have even more impact, both from what it's doing, but also in terms of the world, I was like, well, that's a nice little career arc. That it wasn't the goal when I started, but it certainly became the natural goal as it went along.
Good for you. What did you go in at Viacom as?
I was there 17 years. I'm one of your, business school guys.
McKinsey?
I was McKinsey. Yep. I went to Stanford.
Yep.
And I went into what...
Were you always good at school? Like that came natural to you?
I always liked school, and it came, pretty natural. And what I liked, I don't even know it's the academic part. I just loved exploring ideas. I was a history major in college, and got obsessed with how the past shapes the future, and
I'm into that too.
Actually, it shapes and constrains the future, and I just love ideas, and the way ideas can shape the world and shape the mind. So from that perspective, I loved school. Not enough to go get a PhD. It was really like how do you do it and make a difference in the real world. Not that PhDs don't make a difference in the real world, but it wasn't the temperament I was going to go to.
I totally understand. What do you, when you're having dinner, actually let's go dinner conversation here a little bit.
Yeah.
Given that job, you're meeting people, obviously COVID's been weird, but probably starting now and definitely before COVID, you're on board, fundraisers, dinners, kids, school, in life. When you tell them you have this job, it's not like a normal, mundane, you're exec here. If you stayed at McKinsey, you'd be like, oh, cool, you like that? You get real reactions.
Yeah.
Right? You probably, I would argue, I'm sure I'm gonna guess this pretty right, minimally 7 out of 8 or 6 out of 10 or 7, 8 out of 10 people immediately go into an immediate story of how Sesame affected them or who they liked, right?
Yeah, it is you go in people's jobs, you have expectations. I think the one that I had not completely anticipated is how much the brand and the organization
impacted people
around the world. And I mean that around the world. The story you told is one I did not go in eyes wide open, which is number of people you go around learned English from Sesame.
Yep.
The number, you go to Japan, you go to the Middle East, you're here and the immigrant children who said, yes, that's what I learned. Both parents and kids and adults. Or the memories that they had, how that either it touched them, it taught them. We have a board member who's Hispanic and who saw Maria growing up.
Yeah,
and
it's huge. It's huge.
And that sort of representation, that validation of
the representation was extreme and I grew up in a lot of blue collar neighborhoods that had huge diversity, and I even remember being affected by that, right? It was huge. To that point of people responding that way, after they tell you Maria did this, or when Oscar the Grouch did that, or I learned, when people go into what's going on with it now? If we're having that combo, because I think it's important for people to hear this, because I have a lot of affinity for the brand. What is going on with it now? You've got a lot of very senior executives and a lot of entrepreneurs that are going to change the world listening to this podcast. I think that's an important platform for them to hear on what in a world where they may want to join or business develop with. What is going on now?
Yeah. So one amazing thing, and this is probably a side of almost all great companies, and a tribute to the founders, and that gets you to the now, is Joan and Lloyd are the founders who are still alive today, and sometimes in reality and sometimes in spirit, just for my mentors. They had their North Star concepts. And a lot of them was what I want to do, and focus on early childhood, focus on the whole child, and focus on leveraging media and technology to reach and engage. What that means today is completely different, and when we started, it was but what drives us is not that what are the issues that matter most, what are the ones relevant to kids, and how are we going to reach them? with the latest sort of technology and media. And that is when we started. I mean, it's hard for most people on this podcast probably weren't even born back then. 4 television channels, linear, no on demand.
That's right.
Literally, the show reached 70% of all kids. It was preschool on TV. There were 100 and something episodes, and it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. To do that today, you need to be yes on linear, yes on streaming, yes on YouTube, yes on WhatsApp, yes on TikTok, yes into schools, yes with community centers.
Fragmentation, that's scale.
It's the necessity and it's a huge opportunity. And what has made us keep driving is probably 3 things. One is making sure the content evolves and is engaging. Because you can't, we constantly change the show and iterating, and making sure it's entertaining from that perspective. Making sure we're addressing the most relevant issues and whether that's certain types of representation or when COVID happened or after the terrible tragedy of George Floyd, really leaning into self-identity and belonging. So now you're going to see it lean into, emotional health and well-being. And then making sure you're actually reaching the audiences in the way. And it's this, that, and the other thing. And the beautiful thing that's transformed with us now is like we're used to completely be one to many. Because you had a TV, it was a dumb box and now it's one to many, but now when we go digital, we go into communities, we go into schools, we can be one to few or even one to one. There's some amazing stuff we're doing in the Middle East on WhatsApp and really like targeting and delivering the message at the moment when you can to Syrian refugee children and their families that need it most. So the key for us is what's your North Star? Check it sometimes because it may evolve, but constantly evolve the playbook to adapt to the way consumers are playing and take advantage of the technologies that are at your hand to deliver. And that's what we have done. And I would say the last unique thing about us, which is opportunity and challenge, is we're not for profit. We're an independent organization. If we were a for-profit, someone would have bought us by now, I always say. Yeah. Because that's how things go. So we flipped on the side is we just make great partnerships. We're as good as our partners, and whether it's partners to reach the audience, whether it's partners to fund our work, or whether it's partners to build the brand. And those are the 3 things we need. And, allows us to stay true to North Star, get virtual scale, and have outsized impact for the size of who we are.
I love that. What was most surprising in the beginning of COVID to now? If I said recap the day it all shut down to right now, from a brand standpoint or an execution standpoint, anything stand out? I think it could be a good insight for people.
Yeah, COVID for everybody was a transformational moment that will change us in ways I don't think any of us really completely know yet.
Right.
But as our organization, it transformed us. In the moment, it was like, oh my God, like everybody, we went home. But, we also then a week later I remember watching Jimmy Fallon or someone doing their show from the bathtub. And I was like, hey, you know what? We're a kids thing, but we're not animated. We are animated, but we're also live action. Get those Muppets home. Get them some cameras before they sell out on Amazon. And, we're going to meet this moment and engage kids. And I think that it scared us because we're one that research-driven and thoughtful, and we plan and we do this to make sure it's really having the educational impact. But here we realize, like, wow, kids need us now. Families need us now. And necessity was the mother of invention. We started to do some, short form putting on YouTube, and then we're like, you know what? Wow, we could do this. We called up our friends, Lin-Manuel Miranda. We called up Anne Hathaway. We did a special that went from completely remote, that went on air across 7 channels across Warner and PBS.
I remember.
BBC, NHK, TVS Tech, sort of, et cetera. And I think where it transformed us as an organization was that, we've been doing this for 50 years. So while we know what kids need, and even if it's only 90% right, getting 90% right in the moment was more important than 100%.
100%.
A year later. So,
by the way, for everyone who's listening, 72% right.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's trying to be 100% right, where 72 gets you into the Hall of Fame of business and communication.
Yeah, and that gave us, and then again, we started doing these CNN town halls where we would greenlight it on a Monday and be on air on a Saturday addressing heavier issues, whether the fears and emotions of COVID, or then we did this Coming Together special following George Floyd's death to helping kids and families cope. It gave us confidence to trust our experience.
You know what's funny? When you talk about it, what the brand did was, in my opinion, was get out of its bubble and become more oxygen. Instead of being like this, like a thing, it became an overlaying oxygen in other distribution formats and topics.
Yeah. But playing into the DNA, which is that we know the issue, kids and families, and if you get the right partners, you can meet.
Yeah, to your point, it's a distribution and awareness statement, not a essence of who you are statement. As a matter of fact, the essence of who you are gave you the permission for those people to want and need you to do that.
Yeah, and I think it gave us the validation as we that in times of crisis, people turn to brands they trust. And it's up to you as a brand to meet that moment or not. And I believe we met that moment, and that's in some ways regional history, but it's the most time that we ever had.
I'm gonna go very nerdy and very selfish. I apologize, podcast listeners. How does the organization, if it does at all, think about the ebb and flow of the characters who are most popular of the moment, right? So I think a lot about Elmo, his popularity today, I see it, right? Versus Big Bird's popularity in 1975 versus Oscar and Grover. I think about the characters a lot, where I would say that the face of the brand has evolved over the last 50 years. Is that a conversation? Do people have like feelings like Oscar needs more shine?
So a couple things. Some of it is generational. I'm a Big Bird guy.
Yeah.
When I grew up, there was no Elmo, and so it is. Always like that really hard interview question. We interviewed somebody like, so "Who's your favorite Muppet?" Which I can guess who yours is, but like, you know who
mine is, and has nothing. It's the reverse of my personality. Oscar the Grouch. Do you know why?
I was gonna say Oscar.
No, you were not.
Yes, I was.
I'm proud of you, brother. Oscar is 100% my favorite character because he was green. And like green was the foundation of my Jets fan. Like it's all been green. Yeah. It was all about green. I also think he's sweet with a fake exterior.
We have in our upcoming season, there are many ways we stay relevant. Some ways is having, certain celebrities on. And we had Brett Goldstein, Roy Kent, who you can imagine had a bond with Oscar.
Yeah, he is Oscar. His character's written.
And he did the special letter of the day. What letter do you think it was?
A?
F.
I like the way he grunts like A. It's so funny. When Roy Kent, I consumed more television during COVID than anything. With Ted Lasso, I literally believe his entire character is based on Oscar the Grouch.
That moment, there's him and Scram going up to Oscars. You'll see it, season 53, premiering, very soon. But so the answer is, it is a bit of a generational thing, and I don't know the personality thing in different generations. And we do, and today is no ambiguity. If you look at the Q scores of kids, it is Elmo. If you look at the Q scores of adults, it gets into like Cookie Monster and Grover.
Do you know where I just was sitting here as you were talking? I'm sorry to interrupt. I also have to give a huge shout out to Snuffleupagus. It was Snuffy was so crazy. Like I was like, he's so like he was just bigger than life. And so like
No. Well, that's other beauties. Like you have the core 6, 7, 8. Bert and Ernie are obviously big fans of.
Huge. Yep.
But then there are it's a world. I don't know if I call it a Marvel universe, but it's a world of there's Snuffy. There's there's the characters that people all have that special moment to. I think where we struggle with is that, and again, this is where the multiple platforms view. On the core show is, too many characters overwhelm. Our core audience is kids for the show. Obviously, when you go beyond it onto TikTok, we have a lot more broader. Core show, we need to keep the focus, because if you have too many characters, you don't get the affinity. But the beautiful about all the various platforms, whether it's YouTube, whether it's TikTok, whether it's Twitter, where they all have their own character accounts, is you can actually interact with who you most sort of connect with and have that and have that sort of bond. And it's so that's how we sort of balance it. But we definitely have the debate, and we hope to rely on research, because internally people, I like this character, I like that character, and you try not to if you fragment it too much.
Of course,
because, from a kid's perspective, but it works in many other areas.
With 5 minutes to go in this great podcast, and I could do this for 5 hours with you, and I'd love to catch a drink sometime
Yes.
because I between the Jets and character development,
We'll bring you to the set.
I'm
We'll
in.
let you get the photo with Oscar.
I'm in. They're like, I'm locking that in. Team, are you hearing this? I'm 100% in. What have we not touched on that you want this audience to know, or something that you're thinking about, or what have we not touched on?
I think that some people don't, and I'll leave a final thought, which I sort of mean from the bottom of my heart. I think people don't know completely the depth and breadth of the work that we're doing.
I agree. I agree.
You've got alluded to, like, the U.S., some things, as we got into sort of all the stages of COVID.
Yep.
To helping people, families talk about all the issues that came up in the summer of 20, following George Floyd, and now we're taking on self-identity and belonging in a deep way. But there's the global work. You coming from where you didn't know we were global.
Yep.
And we've been global for, it started as a quintessential American show in '69. Next year is going to be the 50th anniversary, continuous, of the German version of Sesame Street. But now, in a world that we try to, prioritize the most vulnerable children as mission-driven, not-for-profit, and the issues that matter most, we are working in the Syrian refugee region, trying to bring early childhood education with a great partner on the ground, IRC, combining mass media with direct services. We are in Bangladesh with some wonderful funding from Lego Foundation. Work in crisis settings in Latin America, in Africa, and now we are deep working on how we can support Afghanistan after last year, and now in Ukraine. The same sort of mantra for early childhood education: don't forget about it. They need food, they need shelter.
Yeah.
But if you lose that generation, you've lost a generation. And in some parts of the world, other forces will fill them in.
Yes.
And it has a lifetime impact. And I think that's something that people just don't know. The depth and breadth of, some people used to call it muppet diplomacy. We just call it like servicing all kids and making sure that we're having the greatest impact that we have. So that's the domestic work, and that we're much more than a TV show. We assume there's a media platform and a technology that kids and families are consuming, and we are there, and that's where we want to continue. And what I leave is the mantra I will keep going. This goes to you too, Gary, by the way, which is like, we're as good as our partners.
Yeah.
So, if someone, everyone should care about kids because kids are the future. So if someone thinks that they can help us deliver there, from reaching the audience from our financial perspective,
Yep,
or elevating the brand, because the brand's the top of the funnel, that's to your audience. And by the way, and having some fun too, because without fun, we don't engage and nothing happens. We really say, can't reach, you can't teach.
I agree. I think the fun and the stories and the characters is the reach, and I think you've spoke on it, and obviously you have a good grasp on it. The fragmentation of attention is very different than when this brand started, and that leads to enormous opportunity. I actually think it leads to deeper character development opportunities because you can segment in different ways. So nonetheless, this is super enjoyable. I look forward to, thank you for the invite. I will 100% take you up on it.
All right, awesome.
Thank you, my friend.
Bye, bad dolphins.